tell you the news as calm and neutrally as possible, while the commentators, or pundits, are the people who analyze the news for you. They can be as biased as they want because it is always made very clear that they are just speaking from their own personal perspective. Pundits are useful employees for news organizations for a number of reasons. By analyzing the news rather than just reporting it, pundits are able to help the audience make various subjective assessments about news stories and events. Assessments like, is this story a big deal or not? How should we feel about it? Happy, sad, outraged, or what? How can this story help us make useful predictions for the future? Should this story motivate us to act any particular way in response to it? And of course, pundits help make the news more lively and entertaining. When you are unbiased, you have to be rather stiff and formal all the time. Whereas when you're free to express an opinion, you can be more funny or combative or thoughtful, and that's more fun to watch or read. I've had a fairly conventional pundit career up here in Canada. I've written hundreds of opinion columns for newspapers and magazines and news websites, and made tons of regular appearances on TV shows to talk about what I think. I don't really do as much of this anymore because I'm now pretty YouTube-centric, but I am still a weekly columnist at the Washington Post. Being a professional pundit is a very flattering, very empowering existence. Being paid to share your opinions with the world can make you feel like a real big shot, because it means that someone out there has made an assessment that your opinions are inherently valuable. If you're someone who just generally likes to write and think and talk, it can seem like a real dream job. But of course, at the end of the day, it is still a job. People who run newspapers and TV stations and websites won't just hire any old self-important rando to talk about the news. They're generally looking for people with a few key characteristics. Number one, confidence. A pundit has to be able to express himself clearly and assertively. No stage fright or being too timid to express a strong opinion in public. Number two, generalized knowledge. When you are working as a professional pundit, the expectation is that you will be able to speak confidently about anything that makes it into the news, even if it is not something that you are personally interested in all that much. Your job is to be up to date and well informed on basically everything. I remember when I was working at Sun TV, I would be doing multiple segments a day on everything from the casting of the new James Bond to changes to the Ontario welfare system. I didn't naturally have strong opinions on a lot of the stuff I was made to talk about, so often I would just sort of have to force myself to. Number three, consistent worldview. Producers and editors like to know what they're getting from a pundit, because then it becomes easier for them to fit that person into some larger content strategy. So for example, a newspaper might hire a liberal columnist because they already have a conservative one and they think it's important for there to be balance. Or a TV segment producer might want to have a guest who has very strong opinions on free trade because that's also the opinion of the host. So while it's important to be able to analyze just about anything that happens in the world, it is also very useful if your opinions can be sort of broadly consistent and predictable. If your views are kind of all over the place, that tends to come off as a sign that you're not a very mature or organized thinker, and that's kind of unattractive. This mix of being confident, consistent, and knowledgeable might not seem like that big of a deal, but it is much harder than it looks. Having had to do this myself for many years is one of the reasons why I tend to have a lot of respect for successful pundits at the professional level, even if I don't necessarily agree with them at the personal level. Take Ann Coulter, for instance. I think she's pretty out there, but I also have some respect for the fact that she's been able to make a go of this profession for 20 years. For 2 decades, she has been writing a weekly column and going on television shows and churning out books. And she's able to talk about pretty much any issue that headlines or producers throw at her, and always from the perspective of like a mainline partisan Republican. Even as the definition of a mainline partisan Republican has changed a lot over the years. So even if you think her commentary is a net negative contribution to the world, I still think it is possible to respect her as a professional. But Ann Coulter is also a good case study because the success of some of the more extreme political pundits of her sort also reflects some of the market pressures of this profession. As the media landscape is getting ever more crowded with this huge abundance of TV shows and newspapers and magazines and news websites and podcasts and YouTube channels, the pundit world is getting pulled in 2 different directions. On the one hand, there has never been more market demand for pundits to provide content for all of these media outlets to write the columns and host the shows and serve on the panels and all the rest. This has made the job of professional political pundit a much more viable career option for a much larger assortment of people. But I would say it has also resulted in a lot of rather subpar people getting into the industry. I think there are a lot of signs that in modern America, a certain desperation for content is resulting in a lot of people getting hired as political commentators who really shouldn't. You can easily identify these people because they're sort of a caricature of the values I was describing before. Instead of confident, they are just vain and self-important. Instead of having broad, generalized knowledge, they just repeat the same cliches in every context. And instead of having a consistent worldview, they are just unthinking mouthpieces for their favored political party. I don't mean to be beating up on conservatives so much, by the way. I'm just honestly less familiar with left-wing pundits because I don't consume as much of that media. Anyway, a preponderance of B-grade pundits also means that it takes a lot more to get noticed and actually rise to be successful in like the upper tiers of the profession. Which brings us back to Ben Shapiro. I actually relate to Ben a lot because we are the same age and presumably got bit by the political commentary bug around the same time. But Ben has obviously been a billion times more successful than me, which I respect, but also view as a bit of a cautionary tale on the price of pundit fame. Thanks to his enormous ambition and self-discipline, Ben was able to start working as a professional political commentator when he was just a teenager. This was a big deal because society does not generally think of teenagers as having particularly worthwhile political opinions, just because people at that age do not tend to have a lot of depth of knowledge about the world. But Ben was able to make up for this by ratcheting up his other two stats, confidence and consistency. He was able to overcome his handicap and stand out in a crowded marketplace by carrying himself in this extremely assertive way and being very consistently right-wing. Ben Shapiro is now in his mid-30s, and I think he would be the first to tell you that he is a much wiser man than he used to be. In recent years in particular, I think you can quite clearly see that he has come under the influence of older, more intellectual men like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, and this has made him into a more thoughtful and sophisticated thinker. He may have started out as an Ann Coulter type, but now wants to be something more. This year, he wrote an ambitious new book called The Right Side of History: How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. It was a more deep and thoughtful book than many of his previous ones, which tended to be rather shrill and simplistically partisan. But then when he went on the BBC to promote his new book, all the host wanted to talk about was the various extreme things he had said when he was younger. He had to answer for a time in his life when he was much more of a product of the professional pressures of being a political commentator than he is now, when his success allows him greater independence to define his career on his own terms. Now, Ben Shapiro is an adult, and I'm sure he will do fine, but I do worry a bit about the degree that he has become a bad role model. You see a lot of people getting into professional political commentary at younger and younger ages these days. Not only people in their early 20s, but teenagers and even kids. And these kiddos are trying to make a name for themselves in a political commentary marketplace that is not only getting more and more competitive, but is also descending into a kind of shock jock culture where you have to be extremely wild and outrageous to even get noticed. I don't want to get too smug on my own high horse about this because I have certainly done plenty of awful political commentary over the years, but I like to think at a certain point I did have a sort of crossroads moment, a moment in which I had to think seriously about what it would take to become a super successful political pundit and whether or not I was willing to make that sacrifice. Not just a sacrifice in terms of my dignity and my long-term personal reputation or anything like that, but a sacrifice in terms of what I theoretically got involved in political commentary to do in the first place, which was analyze the news in a useful and helpful way. As is so often the case in life, there are always trade-offs that have to be made in the delicate balance between commercial success, fame, self-respect, and personal ethics. And if you don't strike that right balance early on, it can really wind up coming back to haunt you. But you know, I don't want to paint too grim a picture of the state of political commentary. While there are a lot of hackish people out there, we are also living in a truly great era of some really remarkable public intellectuals and political minds. These pundits are a little less famous and a little less entertaining, but also capable of expressing powerful and insightful opinions on political events in a way that is mature, measured, and very well informed. There might be less of this sort of commentary overall, but still enough for it to be pretty overwhelming. I know whenever I go to the bookstore,